the fiscal policy, and the agenda of this class is to find out the difference between the monetary policy and the fiscal policy. Later on, we will move forward to where are the cases where the monetary policies fails, and what is the different types of fiscal policies which the governments generally use. Okay, to start the discussion, it is important for us to understand what are the scenarios in which the growth might be disturbed, the economic growth might be disturbed. See, for the economic growth to happen, what is the important thing is aggregate demand in an economy. So, what is aggregate demand means? It is the demand of all the goods and services by the citizens of a nation. So, when there is a huge demand, what happens in general? There will be production. So, if there is production, what will happen? There will be employment. With employment, the people will get income. With the incomes with the incomes, they start demanding more. So, in this way, what happens is the prices of the goods increases, isn't it? The prices of the goods increases. At the same time, the companies will be willing to invest more, and there will be again the production will be increased and the employment will be more. In this way, the economic growth of a country increases. But due to different reasons, the economic growth sometimes gets disturbed. This disturbance might be due to fall in demand. Why there will be fall in demand means there will be a number of reasons, like for suppose there is an inflation, that means prices have risen. For instance, if you take the case of India, oil prices very much depend our Indian economy. If the oil prices rise, we have to import a very huge amount of oil, and we need to spend a lot of amount of dollars. So in a way, there will be high inflation and the economic growth slow down. Why the economic growth slow down means because of the rising prices, the income levels with citizens decreases, isn't it right? So as the income levels decreases, so as the income levels decreases, the companies start reducing the production. So this is what happens generally. So the important thing is to see this aggregate demand is constant. So let us suppose there is a shortage of aggregate demand. So the slowdown of economy has happened. One reason is shortage of aggregate demand. The second one is it can also happen due to supply shocks. That means let us take the scenario of 1991 Indian LPG crisis. What happened then was India has to pay a huge amount of import bill for oil. So in this way, our economic growth slowed down. So supply side shocks also can reduce the economic growth. So when this reduction in the economy happens, what the countries can generally do is they use two tools known as one tool is monetary policy, the second tool is fiscal policy. So if you see what is monetary policy means, here what the central banks will do is they increase the money supply in the economy. Why they increase the money supply in the economy? Let us suppose the economy is in slowdown. That means the growth should be increased. When the growth will rise, when people have money, so people should have money. So that means money supply in the country should be increased. So what the RBI will do, for instance, in the India, RBI will use a tool known as liquidity adjustment facility, and in that repo rate. So what the RBI will do, it will reduce the interest rates. So it will reduce interest rates. So due to the reduction of these interest rates, money supply will increase in the economy, so people will have more money. So what they will do, they will invest, they will spend. So due to this, the companies will increase the production. So production, if the production increases, what happens? Output increases, employment increases, income levels rises. So if the income levels rises, what happens? Again, the people will start spending more. So this becomes a cyclical phenomenon. So in this way, the central banks, through the changes of interest rates and the money supply, it can stimulate growth. This is the way of stimulating economic growth through money supply. This is in a way demand side intervention. Why this is a demand side intervention? In a way, what the central banks are doing here is they are increasing the aggregate demand in the economy through cheap money supply. Isn't it right? But if we come to the fiscal policy, what happens in the fiscal policy is the fiscal policy is generally used by the central governments. So the central governments, through the budgeting system, they have to see for the revenues and the expenditure. And the major part of revenue comes from the taxation. And even in this taxation, the first one is direct taxation, and the next one is indirect taxation. So what happens in this fiscal policy is the governments in general intervenes in these indirect taxes. Like let us suppose the economy is slowed down. So the economy slowed down means what happens? The people doesn't have enough money to spend. So the government should increase money supply. So how the government will increase the money supply? Simply it will reduce taxes. So government will reduce taxes. So by the reduction of taxes, what will happen? People will have more disposable income, isn't it? So with more disposable income, they spend, they invest, spend, invest, leads to again the companies increase in the production, employment, employment means again income, and again income means again spend and invest. So this becomes a cyclical phenomenon, and the growth rate, that is GDP, starts increasing. So this is the idea of the fiscal policy playing with the taxes. The second way in which the governments intervene is through government spending. So what is this government spending means? Let us suppose the private companies are not willing to spend or invest in an economy. Why? Because they are in a fear, or they lack the confidence, or the investors lack the confidence to invest in India. So now it is the responsibility of the government to create that confidence in the investors. How this can be created? By boosting the economic growth. How the economic growth can be boosted means the government will start spending in infrastructure projects. That means the construction of ports, railways, roads. So through this, what happens? For all these infrastructure projects, what are the things we need is cement, coal, electricity. That means all these eight core sector industries are there, right? Eight core sector industries. So all these eight core sector industries, the demand will increase. So when the demand increases, what happens is there will be more production. So there will be more production in the economy. So this is the idea of the fiscal policy. So by playing with the taxations and the government spendings, the governments in general try to stimulate the economy. The unique advantage of this fiscal policy is it takes care of both demand side and supply side interventions, whereas the monetary policy it takes care only of the demand side intervention. What is the supply side intervention means? Let us suppose the slowdown in economy can happen not just through demand but also through supply shocks like oil prices rising and the inflation rising and the growth getting slowed down. And the second way where the supply side shocks can happen is food prices. India, like take the case of India. India being a monsoon dependent economy, let us suppose a crop failure happens. So when there is crop failure, there will be low food, so the food price will increase. So food price increases means inflation increases, everything increases. So in a way again it slows down the growth. So let us suppose the government has implemented a few schemes where it has effectively managed the food policy through imports and exports and through the mechanisms of MSP. So then the food prices will be stable, inflation will be stable. So the companies will get raw material at a cheaper cost. So in a way, it stimulates the growth. So the advantage of this fiscal policy is it takes care both of demand supply management. So this is the fundamental difference between monetary policy and fiscal policy. So if you see fiscal policy, what it can do is, so it plays with the revenues and expenditures of the government, already we have discussed. The second one is through this, it changes the aggregate level of demand and output. Obviously, if you change the taxation revenues, indirect revenues, you are ultimately increasing the demand and output. The second one is savings and investments will also rise. Why? Because if you reduce the indirect taxes, people will have more disposable income, so they will save more and they will invest more. So again this will come as capital for the com- companies, isn't it? Why? Because if a person saves, he invests that money into banks and the banks lend. So in this way the fiscal policy helps. Okay. Now, if we come to the different types of fiscal policies, there are two different types of fiscal policies. One is fiscal stimulus, the second one is fiscal contraction. Fiscal stimulus is used when there is a slowdown in economy. So there is economic slowdown and the economy should be boosted. So for the economy to be boosted, what the government should do, it should reduce indirect taxes so that the government, sorry, the people will have high disposable income and high savings and investment. So the governments gives a lot of tax stops for SCJs to attract companies to invest, and it also increases the government spending in infrastructure. Like for the suppose the present government is investing in Bharatmala projects, Sagarmala. So all these are aimed at increasing the government expenditure in infrastructure. Let us suppose if the economy is in a too much rapid growth phase where the inflation is going to be very high, then again in this case the economy should be cooled down. That means the demand should be reduced. So how the demand can be reduced? By removing the money from the public. How the money can be removed? By increasing the indirect taxes, by reducing the public spending, by reducing the welfare schemes or transfer money. Transfer money means how the, like suppose pensions, scholarships, the government will reduce this amount so that the people will have less money to spend, and it will again reduce the price levels, and again it will cool down the economy. So in this way the government, if there is economic slowdown, it promotes fiscal stimulus, and there is economic too much of economic growth, it grows for fiscal contraction. So these are the different types of fiscal policies. Now coming to the case where the monetary policy fails to stimulate growth and where the fiscal policy is the only solution, and this is very important from the perspective of the international economics, because The whole idea of using the fiscal policy is the governments should intervene in the markets, because in a capitalist economy, the governments will have no role, isn't it? But when there is a economic slowdown in the fiscal policy, the governments are intervening. But this was not the case in the international economics until 1933. The era of the usage of fiscal policy to stimulate growth happened only after the 1929 Great Depression. So, if you see what happened in this 1929 Great Depression, due to the bubble of stock market, the aggregate supply, that means the aggregate supply of stocks has increased more than the demand. So obviously this has led to fall in prices and in collapse of the international economy, but more particularly USA. So what happened there? Because of the fall in prices, the companies are getting lower profits. So lower profits means low investment. So low investment means low production. Low production means low employment. So low employment means it will again lead to closure of the factories. So this is what happened in the USA in the 1930s era. So ultimately the people have low money to spend. So it led to low consumer spending, low investment, and low consumer confidence in the global economy. So what it has ultimately given rise to, it has, as I have said, there is a fall in prices across the asset levels. So there is a fall in bond and stock prices because the companies are not performing well. So that means the assets are going in a deflationary spiral, but the goods are going at inflationary spiral. So that means the goods which the consumer uses, they are increasing. Why? Because the supply is less, whereas the asset prices like the stocks and bonds, they are deflating because the consumer has low confidence to invest in these investments. So this has given rise to a peculiar scenario where the governments or the central banks of the government has to intervene. As the economy is slowing down here, what the government should go for is expansionary monetary policy. So what happens in this expansionary monetary policy means the government reduces interest rates. So by reducing the interest rates, it increases the money supply. So reduces the interest rates, it increases the money supply. But one peculiar situation what happened during this 1929 phase, and what the economists call this is this phenomenon is liquidity trap. So this is very important. What is this liquidity trap? So because of the consumers have low confidence in the economy, and they feel and they have seen that the economy is in a deflationary spiral, whatever the money supply is increased in the economy and the money the consumers are getting, they are not spending or investing, but rather they are saving it. So that means all the money which the central bank is printing and releasing into the economy, there is no spending or investment, but rather the people are saving it in banks. So again, that means that increase in money supply has failed to stimulate growth in the economy. So this is the era where the economists have came to know the limitations of the usage of monetary policy to stimulate growth. So here the monetary policy has failed completely to stimulate growth because not because it is an effective tool, but because it is very difficult to control speculation, because ultimately what the governments or the central banks have to do is they should boost the consumer confidence in the economy. So with this idea, a British economist named John Maynard Keynes, he proposed the usage of fiscal measures to stimulate growth. Why? Because the monetary policy has failed. So what he has said is, here the governments should use fiscal measures like taxation, providing public employment, to promote growth. And this is what FD Roosevelt has done in the USA after the 1929 Great Depression, and USA within a span of 1 decade has bounced back and its economy was booming. So this is the era which showed the importance of the fiscal policy in case of failure of monetary policy to promote growth. So this was also what happened during the 2008 global financial crisis, when the quantitative easing. What the quantitative easing means, where the US Federal Reserve Center, that means US Central Bank, Federal Fed Reserve, has reduced the interest rates to stimulate the growth. And in India, the government has used fiscal stimulus rather than monetary policy. So this is the idea of this usage of fiscal policy in case of failure of monetary policy. So now that we have seen the monetary policy, we will see what are the demand side and the supply side differences which can happen. See, the aggregate demand can be intervened or can be affected by demand side interventions, like for suppose if you see sudden increase in government spending. Let us suppose there is a sudden increase in government spending. What happens? Let us suppose recently the government has implemented seventh pay commission. So with the seventh pay commission, there is a high disposable income with the people. So they start consuming more, spending more. So the price levels will increase. Obviously, it will lead to higher demand and it will promote growth. The same way, if the taxes are decreased, the people will have higher disposable income, and again the demand will increase. And the second, and in these three reasons, what happens is demand decreases. In the first two cases, demand increases. In these cases, demand decreases. Why? Because if there is any terrorist attack, there the people will have low confidence and there will be low demand and the economy will slow down. And what are the supply side causes can be is, as we have already discussed, crop failures. The second one is the sudden increase in oil prices can also lead to supply side shocks. The third, three, four ones is natural calamities like earthquakes, tsunamis. So all these conditions leads to supply side shocks, and th- when this happens, fiscal policies can be used effectively to promote, to stimulate growth or to cool down the economy from too much rapid expansion. So this is the importance of the fiscal policy. But the important point we need to identify here is the fiscal policy or the monetary policy cannot exist independently. There should be complete correlation between fiscal policy and monetary policy. Why? Because is for to control price levels or to control inflation. Let us suppose the central bank has increased the repo rate. So if the central bank increases the repo rate, what happens? Money supply decreases. But on the other hand, the government is giving loan waivers. That means the people will have more money and again they will start spending more and again the demand will be more. So that means in a way the monetary policy will become ineffective. So to maintain price levels, so to maintain effective price levels, there should be complete coordination between government and the central banks. Without this, the fiscal policy fails to achieve the desired objective. So this is the idea of the fiscal policy. So okay, thank you.